You talked about having gone to your agent several months after being on Cheers, thinking, I don't think we can do this. What was that about?
Pure insecurity. They said, Cheers is taking guys who had basically been working on the kindergarten level of writing, and all of a sudden being asked to do college level work, and the hours were so difficult. The stress was so great trying to perform at that level that, and there was something, who knows what it was at the time, but there was just something that was telling us that it just wasn't the right fit as much as we wanted it to be the right fit. So we marched into Glenn and Les's office and said, you can let us go if you want. There'll be no hard feelings. We just don't feel like we're contributing to the stories, that we're not up to the level of writing that you're expecting from us, and so please, if you want to let us go, that's fine. Just no hard feelings. And they were astonished. They were just shocked, and they went, "Oh, it's the last thing on earth. We think you guys are great." And they went, "We're probably not as good as we should be about letting people know when they're doing a good job." And so everybody had lots of smiles, and I think there was a cake involved, and we all proceeded from there. And it seemed to be the thing that broke a lot of tension for me, because the bottom line was I just didn't think I was doing a good enough job, and I found out that I was doing a good enough job. So.
Where do you think that level of comedy at Cheers came from, that college level vision they had?
Well, I think to answer you in a very simple way, I think it was that they just wouldn't settle. That they would never go, "Oh, that's good enough." There was always a re-examination to see if you could make it better. And that's why you end up staying so late, because you were always examining to see if you could get it better. There was no, it's 6 o'clock, let's go home, no matter what shape the script's in. And, if you look at Cheers, you go, they made it better. At the time, I can't think of anything else, maybe even since, that was on some of those shows firing on all 16 cylinders like that show did.
And they didn't write down to their audience like some comedies do?
Yeah. Well, definitely not. Although I'm not so sure. I'm sort of thinking out loud here, but I'm not even sure that writing down to your audience is really a true thing that writers do. I think writers write at the level they're capable of, at the level of which they are capable. I'm sorry.
If there is such a thing, was there a typical day for you and Peter?
At Cheers?
At Cheers, when you were writing?
Well, it depended on what we were doing, but if you're writing a script, your day gets basically, except for lunch, gets devoted to that, and the other people on staff take over the daily running of the show. But during production week, I'd get up at 8 o'clock, I'd head to the gym, be there about 9, be at the office by 10:30, start pitching stories, or working on scripts, or editing, or just working on the show till there would be a run-through down on the stage about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then you'd go watch that and interact with the actors and have a discussion with Jimmy Burrows about what the script needed, and then you'd head back about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and start that night's rewrite. And if you were lucky, you were out by 7 or 8, and if you weren't lucky, you were out at 4 o'clock in the morning. So.
Do you think the producers went to you and Peter for a certain type of storyline or a certain character?
No, everybody wrote everything. So there's this myth, and I run into it a lot, where and I've never I run into it a lot in terms of people questioning me about things, that certain people may be experts on one character, or I've never found that to be true. It's sort of like if you're doing a show, you know what all the characters do, and you should be able to accomplish all of them with the skills of an Olympic gymnast.
You did say you tended to gravitate towards the Diane Chambers character. You found a voice to write for. What was the connection there?
Well, just because She, like I, is a big intellectual blowhard. Do you know? So a little pretentious and willing to show off what she knew, and that's sort of me in a nutshell. But I also like Frasier for that reason too. So I guess there is some truth maybe to, because if we were going to of course I could write Sam as well as anybody, but if it was getting down to specific things about sports stuff, I'm not a big sports guy. So my partner Peter's a big baseball fan, so he would know all that stuff. So he'd know how if we were talking very specifics about sports, how it behaved. But short of that, I was able to write Sam as well as I was able to write Diane or Norm or Cliff or
Do you think Shelley Long saw you as a voice for her?
Probably not. Probably not. That line between the writers and the actors it was very cordial on that set. But it's sort of like what is the membrane that separates the brain from the skull? It worked quite well, but you're really not aware that it's there. So the actors really didn't know. Wouldn't know who was writing what, or the one thing I do remember is one of the great things I learned about how to run a show, particularly at run-throughs, is all the writers would come down and line up, and then the actors would do the thing, and then you'd discuss it. But the rule was anybody could talk to anybody, so it wasn't like, oh, the executive producer only talks to the director, and then that gets passed on to the actors, which is the way it is on a lot of shows, and I found it very destructive. And a good way to harbor ill feelings. So I could, as third man on the totem pole, I could talk to any actor that I want, or give a note, or get into a discussion with Ted or Shelley or Rhea or John or anybody about something that's going in their character. So I can't remember what made me go down this path, but it was I think there may be some idea of an actor having a knowledge of somebody maybe being a little more what's the word I'm looking for? Sympathetic to their character.
Talk about a couple of your favorite episodes and why they were your favorites of Cheers.
Well, of course, the first one we did was so much fun because it was the first one. It was also very early Frasier Crane, so it was getting to write a character that hadn't even been named yet. It was the first time we were nominated for an Emmy. And plus, it was just a particularly good story, and it was a story that I think a lot of people remembered. I liked the second one we wrote, which was Too Good to Be for Real, which is where the guys in the gang, the guys in the bar, put a fake ad in a singles thing that Carla answers. They're trying to make her feel good, and it was our second script for Cheers in the next season, and it was also nominated for an Emmy too. So we were sort of like hitting them out of the park. So we're feeling really good. There was one called From Beer to Eternity, which was the first of what became known as the Bar Wars series, which Ken Levine and David Isaacs eventually took over. But the first one was where the rivalry between Cheers and this other bar called Gary's Old Town Tavern started. And this was the one about a bowling tournament. And there was a speech in it I just loved where Diane, in just a wonderful speech that we had a blast writing, talked about the wonders of bowling, as only Diane Chambers could. I liked that. Gosh, there were so many memorable ones. Peter and I were able to write an episode for John Cleese, who's one of our comedy idols. So that was very fun. Very fun.
When did you become a supervising producer on the show?
I think the next year. It was like the second year we were there.
Do your responsibilities change with the title?
No. It's basically, that that whole producer thing, and they're basically just all writers, and the title sort of just lays out the pecking order, who was there first, or who had a higher title when they were hired on, so they can leapfrog ahead of somebody. It's basically so that people can get producers behind their names, so that they can win Emmys if the show wins.
What was your relationship with Glenn and Les Charles?
It was great. I was in awe of their talent. Early on, it was in awe of being in a room with them. I was pretty shy the first year, scared to say anything lest I say something wrong or I pitch a really bad joke. Until it became clear to me that the whole point of being in that room is to do what Glenn said. You have to come in here and pull your pants down, not literally, but you have to be willing to just lay it all out there, and if it's bad, it's bad, and you'll get razzed, and if it's great, it's great, but don't edit yourself. They're just really interesting, personable guys who, to this day, I am friends with still.
How about your relationship with James Burrows?
Well, that was a little bit different. James is very gruff, and when you first meet him, you think, oh, this guy's tough. And as you get to know him, you just realize he's very sweet, very kind, very fair, and I would consider him. We haven't gotten to the part where I started TV directing, but he was my teacher. He was my mentor. He was the one I learned how to direct television from watching him and sometimes asking a lot of questions, and we've also become great friends and remain great friends to this day.
What do you think makes these three guys? What makes them so successful?
Well, I think I said it earlier. They're not willing to settle. And I think there are too many people in the arts who are willing to settle.
Describe your relationship with the other writers on Cheers.
Well, it was Heidi Perlman, who was Rhea Perlman, who still is Rhea Perlman's sister, again, she and David Angel were the ones who were already there when Peter and I, the interlopers, appeared, and they viewed us with great suspicion. But we ended up becoming great friends. And I think the second year we were there, Glenn and Les, I think that would have been the fifth year of the show, and Glenn and Les were really getting anxious to sort of, for Glenn to head to the 13th hole at Pebble Beach, and for Les to head up to his place in Santa Barbara and spend more time away. So the show was basically turned over to the four of us. And we got along really, really well. Of course, David and Peter and I hit it off well enough that we decided to form our own production company. Heidi went off to do the Tracy Ullman show, I think, the year after that. And then we started an influx of newer writers, Fief Sutton and voluminous number of writers. I can't remember them all, but when it's when the quality of work is high, and what's expected of you is high, and the people expecting of you are kind, it's just a wonderful working environment, no matter how hard it gets. And one of the things that early on in the Jeffersons, for instance, the way a show was run then was Ron Levitt and Michael Moy didn't do this, but the previous administration did. And I heard that this is a way that many sitcoms are run, is the executive producer would pit writing teams against one another, which is you go to a run-through and you'd come back afterwards and say, okay, we need a joke here, we need a joke here, we need a joke here, we need a joke here. Each of you go to your rooms, and whoever comes up with the best one is the one that gets it in the script. So it would develop this negatively competitive spirit. It's like you don't want to be competing against each other in a writer's room. And when we got to Cheers, everybody did everything together. So it was like, you help me up this far, and maybe off of my idea, you'll think of something that will take it to the next level. And so there was a great sense of camaraderie in the Cheers room, and yeah, it was good. It was good.
Unlike The Jeffersons, which was more like a traditional family comedy, Cheers was a gang comedy.
Mm-hmm.
What's the key to writing a gang comedy?
Well, you have to have the key is the same in either one of them. The key is interesting characters and compelling relationships. That's the key to any sitcom. And so if you look at a family comedy, it's easy to see what the relationships are, and that the relationship between mothers and sons and husbands and wives and stuff. If you're writing them well, hopefully they're compelling, and hopefully it hasn't gotten on the air unless the characters are interesting. So you just apply the same thing to a workplace comedy. You just need to make sure that the characters are vibrant, real, full of humor, full of life, but more important, that they have interesting, compelling relationships with each other. And so I think I answered your question, but not.
You did. Is the structure different, though? Are the beats different? Is it less setup, punchline?
By deference of it being a gang comedy,
Sure.
No. I mean, you can write a family comedy that's set up, punchline, and you can write a gang comedy that's set up, punchline. It's usually the more interesting the characters are, the less of that there is, because the characters generate a type of character humor that's actually easier to write than thinking of jokes. It's usually when the characters are less compelling, when the relationships are less compelling, or the characters are less interesting, that you have to rely on hard jokes. That's sometimes when you watch a show, you're going, oh, these people aren't that interesting, but they're certainly spouting off one-liners. And sometimes those work.
Sam and Diane being a great example of characters that were very interesting to begin with.
And how about that for a compelling relationship? You wanted to know what was going to happen to them.
Talk about Ted Danson and Sam.
The best way to talk about Ted Danson and Sam Malone is that Ted's a great actor. Ted's not into sports. He's not particularly athletic. He's a gentle, sweet, caring man. He's not a womanizer at all. I mean, he's diametrically opposed to who that character is, which, again, means he's a great actor. Very, very thoughtful. The fun thing about Ted was, we would always try to listen to the actors if they were having trouble with something in a script, and Shelley was very articulate about what it was that she, when she may have been having trouble with the script, and she could express herself very well and very clearly, and sometimes at length. Love you, Shelley. But Ted, if he was having trouble with something, he would go, well, it's you know what I mean? It's he could never quite put into words what was bugging him, but somehow through the grunts and the pauses, well, we for sure knew something was bothering him. So we'd go back and we could almost always figure out what it was that needed to be fixed based on the fact that Ted was gesticulating and grunting. So we knew something had to be fixed.
Talk about working with Shelley and Diane.
Well, for me it was a joy, because as I said earlier, it was somebody to give voice to all my useless knowledge. I have a lot of knowledge about minutiae about composers and operas and playwrights and philosophers, and here was somebody who was not afraid to share that with people. I had a good time with that. I think Shelley, in those early years, well, actually her whole stay on the show, I'd be hard-pressed to think of a more gifted comedic actress on television. And she rode a thin line between caricature and and a real person and wrote it perfectly. I never believed that she wasn't that character, that she was just playing a part. I believed that that was an actual human being there. And man, she could wring a joke out of a straight line. She could get a laugh out of a glance. It was a joy to work with. And smart. You know, the thing you really want is smart, articulate actors who are able to give you feedback about what may or may not be working.
And you say sometimes she gave you feedback at length.
Yeah. Sometimes we had to go, well, Shelley, we do need to move on to the next scene. But it was never oppressive. It was never. It was always for the good of the play. So you would try to sit and listen to it and really figure out what was going on and how we could all make it better.
Talk about your first impression of Cheers writer David Angel.
Well, he got the nickname of the Dean, and it was because he was very distinguished looking, and he was fairly quiet, and I think I mentioned earlier that he would sit quietly for quite a while, and it was, if he'd had a beard, well, maybe he did have a beard then, but he would stroke it. And then sometimes he would pull off his shoe and examine the inside of the shoe. We were never quite sure what he was looking at, but then he'd put it back on, and shortly thereafter would come some brilliant comedic line that you go, where did he pull that out of? Evidently he pulled it out of his shoe. But yeah, just a great guy, and we all became fast friends. And at one point, he pulled Peter and I aside and said, you know, we all get along well together. How about forming a production company and seeing if we can come up with our own series?
What were his strengths as a writer?
Well, it's hard to say. He was just good. You know, when those first drafts would come in, you would hardly have to change a thing. You know, we would have worked on the story, but you send him out on it, and you know, the jokes were fresh. They came out of character. Always thoughtful. Always smart. No easy shots. And he invented the word boink.
Which came from?
Which came from talking about Sam and Diane were boinking. And they were looking for a euphemism for that, and David thought of the word boink. It has since entered the lexicon, which actually I spoke about that at his memorial service as part of his legacy.
If there was such a thing as a standard tape night, how long did the show take to be made that night?
Well, we didn't tape them.
Film them.
We filmed them. We're very upset when people said we taped them. So, gosh, we'd start about 7, depending on how many scenes there were and how many costume changes. 10, so 3 hours, 3.5 hours, something like that. Yeah.
When you joined the show, did the directors have a certain direction they wanted to take Sam and Diane, or did you and Peter?
Well, it wasn't Peter and my call. We would get together with Glenn and Les at the beginning of every season and talk about the direction we wanted to go. And generally it was you know, are they together this season? Are they not together this season? But the truth is that was in my stay there, that was fairly short-lived. The day Peter and I found out we were going to be producing Cheers was the day Nicholas Colasanto died. So we found out that the first order of business was replacing Coach. So I think that may have been part of the stress level when we first started having to do that. We found Woody Harrelson, replaced that character successfully. Shortly after Woody joined the show, Shelley came into the office and said, next season will be my last season. I'm going to leave the show. So we had to start thinking about replacing what at that point we thought may have been an unreplaceable character. So it was full of sort of eventful, I've forgotten the train of thought here. So.
Well, let's talk about some of those characters you mentioned. Nick Colasanto. How did his death affect the show?
Well, he was wildly loved, so everyone missed him dearly. And the cast was affected as you would a beloved friend passing away. And I think he died just with a couple of episodes left to film in the third season. The only episode that Peter and I wrote was our very first one that had him in it. And then I mentioned earlier that there was that year where we had to wait before we joined the show. So it was a good year after Nick had died before we actually came on. So everybody was sort of returned somewhat to return. No, that's not right either. I haven't got my timelines right, but I'm sure you'll figure all that out.
Woody Boyd, the character of Woody Boyd, played by Woody Harrelson, he filled that void left by Nick Colasanto.
The Boyd.
How did he do that?
The Boyd. Well, basically, we wanted a character that had the same spirit, but we didn't want to literally replace Coach, nor did we want to replace him with an older character that was similar to Coach. So we came up with this younger guy who I recall he was Coach's pen pal from the Midwest. And showed up to meet him and found out that he'd passed away and ended up taking over the bartending post. And it was great because he had the same spirit as Coach without being the same character, and it allowed us to go to a whole younger get some younger people in that he would interact with, and it worked out great.
Where did Woody Harrelson come from?
We read about, I think the casting director read over 300 people for the role, and we had already named the character Woody, and Woody Harrelson was the only person actually who had the name Woody. And so, of course, we gave him the part. No, I believe he'd been on Broadway in a Neil Simon play, I think. It was one of the 3B ones, either Brighton Beach or Memoirs, or the one about the arm.
Biloxi Blues?
Biloxi Blues. I think that was the one. I think he was in that. And the casting director had found him there.
Where did the idea for Lilith Sternin come from?
Well, Bill and Sherry Steinkeller wrote an episode where we wanted. The idea was that Frasier was having dating trouble. This is after Diane and he had split up. And Frasier was having dating trouble, so the boys in the bar said, "You know, the problem is you date other doctors and university professors, and you need to branch out, and you need to find simpler women." So they set him up with a date. And we were thinking of making it a recurring character, and as I'm speaking, the actress's name is going out of my head. Forgive me. Very high, squeaky voice. I'm trying to think what. Yeah.
He went out on a date with this
the
character played by this actress.
Yes, and we were thinking of making it a recurring character, but in structuring the story, we thought, here's the way we'll start the show, is showing one of his bad dates. So we have Frasier coming into the bar for an after-date drink with this very stiff fellow psychiatrist that he's been out on a date with, and they had 2 pages of dialogue where it became clear that they had just a horrible time together. And this actress came in for another part that was coming down the line for a love interest for Sam Malone. It was going to be a politician. It ended up being played by Kate Mulgrew. But at the time, this actress came in named Bebe Neuwirth to read for that role, and we went, well, you're not quite right for that, but would you be interested in doing this smaller one? And she went, I don't know. It's just a couple of pages, and the other part is so good, I don't know if I wanted to. And we finally said, come on, just see if you'll just do this 2-page scene for us. And as they say, the rest is history. The 2 pages were such gold that we completely dumped the other the other actress that we were going to make a regular, and wrote another episode almost immediately for Lilith to come back. One of my favorite episodes where Lilith and Frasier are being interviewed on television, and they're so sexually turned on to one another that they start playing footsie underneath the console. And she scored big in that again, and so from that point on, we're not fools. We went, we've got something here. Let's see where it goes, and it went a long way. It went a long way.
Now, around this time, you mentioned that Shelley Long said that the following year would be her last.
Right.
What were your thoughts on that? How did you think it would affect the show?
I thought it might be the end of it. I thought, because we didn't know what we were going to do, and we didn't know if that relationship was so essential to the success of the show that it just might slip away. And we knew we had to find another compelling relationship at the core of the show, but we didn't know what it was. It's sort of simultaneously with trying to figure out what the character was, they also set about trying to find an actress. And they hit upon this idea of the bar being bought by a conglomerate, and the boss being sent down to run it and to straighten things. The MBA was this sort of uptight, tough managerial type. And so it sort of glommed onto that. And the first person that Jeff Greenberg, who was casting at that point, thought of was Kirstie Alley, who I had seen in a production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof at the Mark Taper Forum and just thought was terrific. And she came in, and the guys thought she was terrific. And it was a pretty short-lived casting session, and she got it fairly quickly. And I do remember the first day of the reading, Kirstie came in a blonde wig dressed as Diane Chambers, which to me was a stroke of brilliance in terms of just breaking the tension, and okay, here she is. Unfortunately, the tension sort of returned fairly quickly, because as we started filming the shows, we realized that the character wasn't really working, and we couldn't figure out how to write her. And there was I'm not even sure Kirstie knows this, but there was a few episode period where in the writer's room it was like, how do we get her in the front door and into the office as quickly as possible? Because we don't know what to do with her in that bar, because it's just not working, which was scaring us quite a bit. And then there was two things that happened. One is that there was a little bit where she was trying to stop smoking, and Sam came in the room and caught her, and Kirstie said, oh, you know what I can do? I can take a cigarette and I can flip it inside my mouth, so you don't know I have it, and then when I'm done, I can flip it back out again and do that. We went, really? And so she did it, and it was hilarious. And it all of a sudden made us start seeing the characters if there could be some mischievous fun there. But the big thing is I think it may have been in the same episode or an episode nearby, she broke down crying. And Kirstie was a great crier. And what we realized was, once you started seeing the vulnerability that this woman, what she's putting on as this tough managerial type, is just a facade for this marshmallow of a human being that's inside, then we had things to play. And she could play it really well. And from that moment on, we sort of never looked back. It was fine.
The character of Diane Chambers was written out so that maybe she would come back at some point? How was she written out?
I remember it being a very sweet last episode, and I can't remember where you probably know, did she move away?
I think she went off to write a book,
but
indicated
right.
she would come back.
Yeah, we totally left the door open. I don't know if we ever did this or not. I know we did something similar. We may have dealt with it in some way, but we always wanted the book that she wrote was going to be turned into a TV series about her experiences in the bar. And I think we ended up never doing it on Cheers, but on Frasier, she came back and she'd written a play that was about her experiences. And then there was thinly veiled characters that were...
Did her departure change the dynamic of the show?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because everyone had a new person to adjust to. Kirsty was really fun, really game, fun to be around, and it was fun watching the actors find the new relationships. So, and once they realized that the character was going to work and that it wasn't going to threaten their livelihoods, things relaxed and everybody got really fun. And then it wasn't shortly there after that I exited. So. I wasn't around, I guess, the last 4 years or something like that.
Which we'll get to in a second. Mm-hmm. In Kelsey Grammer's book, he talked about there being tension between him and Shelley Long because Shelley didn't like the character of Frasier. What was it like? Were you aware of that tension, and what was it like off camera, if at all?
Honestly, I was never aware of it. So what he's talking about may have happened in the third season, which is when I had already written an episode, but I wasn't around yet, because that was the first season when Frasier really started showing up. And I think by the time I got there, it was whatever had resolved itself, and Shelley, it became clear that Frasier was going to be around, and so being professional actors, they just dealt with it. I really got no whiff of that by the time that I was there.
By and large, you said it was a very cordial, fun atmosphere on the set. The actors got along.
Yeah. Like every family, there's the eccentric here and the eccentric there, but and the spat here and there, but nothing that was show threatening.
Do you think that contributed to the on-screen characters' chemistry?
Oh yeah. Although aren't there shows that are famously, the stars couldn't stand each other and wouldn't speak to each other, and yet you'd have no clue watching. I mean, the one that comes to mind is Laverne and Shirley, but I think it helps the overall show when the case is that things are congenial, more so in that everyone's more. Everyone is in an atmosphere where they feel they can contribute, and when things are tense on a set, you can get things good, but the free flow of ideas and the sense of let's all make this better doesn't exist, and so it's. I don't think it's a matter of actually seeing tension between two actors underneath what's going on stage, as it is just. I think when comedy can thrive, the comedy gets better.
How did your role on Cheers change through the years?
I didn't have a role on Cheers. Although Peter and David and I did appear in the last episode we produced. Somebody described us as three guys who could walk into a bar not to talk to each other. No, I'm. As I said, Glenn and Les, after the first year, turned it over to Heidi and David and Peter and I, and that was where. That's where I really learned to be a showrunner, because I was running the show with those other guys. We had to find the writers. We had to come up with the story ideas. And yes, we had to pitch the story ideas and clear them with Glenn and Les, but we had to generate them. We had to put them together. And we had to go to the run-throughs and be the bosses and deal with problems that came up on the set. So, I would say my Cheers years were where I learned two things. One is that you can make it better by working on it, and it was my education in how to be a showrunner.
Why did you move on from the show?
David Angel came to Peter and I and said, "Wow, I think we get along great, and do you want to form a production company and see if we can come up with our own series?" I remember distinctly thinking, No, not really. I'm happy working on Cheers for as long as it'll be on the air. And then, but Peter was more inclined to want to do it, and so I went along, and I remember the shocked look on Glenn and Les's face when David and Peter and I went into the office and said, we're not coming back next year.
They felt.
I don't know what they felt. I other than that, I can assume that they were worried because the three people that had been running the show and that they trained to run the show were now saying goodbye. Later I would learn, being on the other side of that desk, that that's the way of the world. Just about the time you've trained people and they're terrific and you feel you can turn things over to them, that they go, okay, it's time to go do my own thing now. So I suspect that they were smart enough to understand that. But there were as far as I know, there were no hard feelings. And we assured them that Bill and Sherry Steinkellner, who at that point had been there for a couple of years, could handle taking it over. So,
What's your fondest memory of the show?
Nothing's coming to mind. It was generally a fond experience from soup to nuts. Even though sometimes the nuts were hard to crack. But
What do you think the legacy of the show is?
I think that the legacy of Cheers is one of I think it may be the best gang comedy ever written, or certainly up there with Taxi. And I think there's that legacy. I also think there's a legacy of, and I keep saying it over and over again, that you can make things better by working on them more. And that you shouldn't settle. That in television, you don't have to settle. You can. You can write up to your audience. You can even shoot over their heads if you want.
And trust they'll go.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then came Wings. What's the premise of Wings?
Cheers in an airport. For all the good that is and for all the bad that is. We left, we told Glenn and Les we were leaving Cheers, and they asked us if we could stay on for half a season, and the next season to sort of oversee the transition. So we did that, and then we left, I think, in January, 89 or something like that, and spent a year trying to come up with our first series. And looking back on Wings, I'm certainly proud of it. And more often than not, people will come up to me and say, the one I really like that you did was Wings, which always sort of surprises me because it was the tough one. It was the tough one. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to think of. It wasn't easy casting it. We can get into all that, but the thing I remember most about Wings is I look at it and it's really the work of guys who were timid to stray too far away from the model that they knew. So when I say it was Cheers in an airport, I'm totally copying to that, and it's because it's what we knew. So we thought, okay, what's our setting going to be? And we were casting about for some place where anybody could walk through the door, where there was one room where there could be a group of people that worked together, where someone was an antagonist, where people that have different reasons to be in this one room together. And I think David Angel was the one who said something about a small airport. I mean, well, that's sort of interesting, but we explored that a little bit, and I can't remember the actual sequence of things, but that year, a friend of mine said, "Do you want to go spend Labor Day in Nantucket?" And I'm in LA, and I'm going, that's a long way to go for a 4-day weekend. But he said, "Oh, come on. I have a friend who has a house there. It's for free. We'll take the red eye on Friday night, and we'll go. And you can take an extra day off." And so we land in Boston, and then bleary-eyed, I'm led to this little plane that's going to fly me from the Boston airport to Nantucket. And I'm going, well, this is weird. I've never experienced anything like this. And we land in Nantucket, and it's this charming little airport. And the next day, I called Peter and David up, and I said, I think I found the place that we want to set this. So I think at that time we'd already pitched and written quite a bit. We knew it was going to be everywhere, we just didn't know where. But as with so many things, those ideas sort of overlap when they happen. But I remember going to pitch the idea though to Brandon Tartikoff, and Brandon Tartikoff saying, "I don't know, a series in an airport, all I see is people's backs lined up at counters." And by this time we had done a lot of research on these small airports. He said, no, here's how it isn't the way they are. There's a lunch counter, and there's usually a couple of competing airlines and a car rental place, and then there's a hangar and all this stuff. So we got an artist friend of ours to literally draw him a picture of what it looked like, and he went, "Oh, okay." So we wrote a first draft of it, and Tartikoff read it, and he went, "I like the idea, but the script, I can't let you do this script. You have to write another one." So, we'd made a rookie mistake, which was we had all these great characters, and what we did is we strung together a series of scenes that introduced each of the characters. Here's a scene where we see who Joe Hackett is. Here's a scene where we see who Brian Hackett is. Basically, the anchor of the series was two different brothers who ran a small airline out of the Nantucket airport. And here's a scene who shows who their competitor Roy is, the bad guy. And here's a scene that shows who Helen is, the love interest who runs the lunch counter. And here's a scene that shows who Lowell is, the doltish mechanic. And what we forgot was a story. And so we went back and analyzed the whole thing, and we decided, okay, if we rewrite this again, we can save all the scenes for somewhere farther down the line. But what we really need is a really strong story. Because what you realize is that if you have a really strong through line, you will find out who those characters are by the way they react in that story, as opposed to having to have a whole scene where you just reveal who they are. So we came up with this fairly strong narrative, and it worked. Tartikoff went, "This is great. It's exactly what I'm looking for. Let's do it." So
You found it tough to build a show from the ground up, though.
Oh yeah, particularly never having done it before.
The biggest challenges being what?
Just coming up with the idea, coming up with the characters. Because as I said earlier, the whole key to the sitcom is not so much the place. You go around, and over the years, it's like every place I walk into goes, "You should do a sitcom about this fill in the blank where I work," because boy, the characters here and the things that go on. And the truth is they would all make great sitcom settings, because what really makes a great sitcom is interesting characters and compelling relationships, and those are hard to figure out. So it was hard to figure out what was going to be the compelling relationship at the center of Wings, where it was Sam and Diane and Cheers. In Wings, it's a relationship between two brothers that had been estranged. So we thought that was pretty strong, and then there was going to be a love interest, but we didn't want it to mirror Sam and Diane. So it's a childhood friend of both of theirs who's blossomed into a beautiful woman, and there's a competitive friction going on between the two. So you figure out that's an interesting, that's a compelling relationship. And but I can describe them in 30 seconds, but it takes 6 months to figure them out and to find them, you know.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Did you have certain characters or actors in mind for those characters?
Not one. The Wings was... I talk about the 3 series that we did as sort of like sitcom A, sitcom B, and sitcom C. Sitcom A, Frasier, was the one that you could do no wrong, that you, from the moment you thought of it, everything fell into place easily, and it was a critical and rating success from the minute it hit the ground. Sitcom B is Wings, which ended up being a success, but it was just a struggle every step of the way. And then sitcom C, which was Encore, which was just, despite brilliant cast and brilliant writers and really good direction and set, it just could not make it work no matter what you did. So, but Wings was starting with the fact of having to write 2 pilots for it. Then we set out to do the casting, and in casting in Hollywood, the hardest category to find is 28 to 32-year-old, really handsome, sexy, leading men who are good actors and have a sense of humor and can deliver a joke. If you are that, you are usually working because it's really hard to find them. And we had to find 2. And it took us a long time to find Tim Daly and Steven Weber. It was we were starting to despair, actually. And then it was time to do Helen, who had originally been written as Helen Trionkos, a sultry Greek beauty whose father owned the lunch counter and died and left it to her. And we decided that we wanted this actress that we found named Peri Gilpin for that role. And we took her into Brandon, and he went, she's really good, but I don't think she's ready to do the lead in a network sitcom yet. And so we were disappointed, but he said, how about, there's this actress named Crystal Bernard. So we went, well, Crystal Bernard has a southern accent. How does that fit in with sultry Greek beauty? And he basically said, well, you'll figure that out. So we met Crystal, and interestingly enough, she came in after having almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning in a trailer of a show that she was working on. But she pulled it together and got in to meet us, and we went, now that's a trooper, you know, to get up the next morning after having been in the hospital and nearly moving on to come in for an audition. So we liked that, and we liked her, and we looked at footage on her and went, well, yeah, she's great. We figured out a way very facilely and totally unconvincingly to describe why she would have a southern accent having grown up on Nantucket, but which no one ever believed. But finally we just went, what are you going to do? And so we said, yeah, that's who we want. And then we found out that she had commitments to other shows that were going to make the delay of our pilot. We had to put it off for 3 months or something like that, waiting for her. We ran and said, wait, it'll be worth it. And it was. First table read was great. We were on our way. And it was just enough of a ratings success that we could keep going. But it never really went through the roof. And I was glad that we kept going, but it never caught the zeitgeist, as it were.
Did that bother you?
Not really. It's like I've got a show that's on the air and it keeps getting picked up, and even though it's being moved around all over the schedule, and somehow it's hanging on. Then an interesting thing happened is USA cable channel, like in the second or third year, USA bought it and started showing it. And when I say showing it, I mean they showed it. We were actually becoming the butt of jokes on other sitcoms, like, what's on TV tonight? Wings. What's on this channel? Wings. What's on this channel? Wings. Wings, and more wings. Well, what happened is people discovered it, and it drew them back to the network first runs, and our ratings started slowly rising, and I totally attribute it to the exposure on the cable, and it lasted 7.5 seasons.
What did Wings teach you about creating and producing a show?
Well, Wings, the learning curve on Wings was about being totally your own boss and what it's like when you don't have, when you think you're running the show like we were in Cheers, but we're still having to answer to someone else and could turn to someone else if you really got in trouble. Wings taught me what to do when there's no one else to turn to. When you're responsible, when the buck stops with you, as Harry Truman said.
Which is just to figure out a way.
Yeah, you figure out a way. And plus, at that point, all the network notes were coming to us. All the, fighting over, casting decisions and what they need for sweeps, and we want to do it. No, we don't want to do it. But you have to do it. Well, we're going to put our foot down. All those. That was really learning to deal with the network in that show. The other thing that happened during Wings was one day, Andy Ackerman, our director, I was at home on a Monday morning, and Maggie Randall, our line producer, called and said, Andy fell off a horse. He can't come in today. There's 4 cameras and a whole crew sitting on stage waiting for a director. We don't have anybody. You've made all this noise over the years. How you want to do it? Do you want to come down here and do that? And I'm very glad I did. I went, okay. And I walked onto the set. And you have to understand, I'd been trained as a theater director, so I knew how to handle the actor's part. Obviously trained as a writer, so I knew how to talk about scripts and plot points with the actors in an intelligent manner. Been an actor myself, so I know how to approach the material and really sort of communicate with them. But I had always been so busy, I never had time to go down and really learn cameras. So I just threw myself on the mercy of the technical director and said, "Help me through this." And so I directed my first episode of Wings, and then I did another one the next week, and then I went, "Oh, I sort of like this," and I tend to have a talent for it, and so I kept going.
Did you have a certain approach to your actors that other directors didn't?
Well, a lot of TV directors don't know how to talk to actors because they come out of a technical side. They've either come up as editors or they've come up as assistant directors, technical directors, or directors of photography, or and so I found it very useful that I had been an actor, so I could talk to them on those terms. And also very useful that I was also a writer, so I could talk to them about the text, probably in a way that other directors couldn't. So it really served me well because I think a lot of directors are at a disadvantage by not understanding acting and not necessarily understanding writing, and so they just allowed the writer-producers to just fulfill that part of the directing obligation, and then they just take over the technical part. So that's why I think a lot of TV directors are only handle cameras and sort of defer to the writer-producers when it comes to dealing with the actors. But I didn't have to defer to anybody.
So eventually Wings went off the air. Was that a cancellation, or had you run its course?
Run its course. Peter and David and I stuck around for, I think, the first 2 seasons of it, and then we thought, it's time for us to do another series. So we withdrew and started thinking about what that series might be.
Was there a finale to Wings?
Yeah. Wings and Frasier ended up overlapping, so, I think for 3 years or something like that. So, yeah, there was a lovely finale to Wings.
Okay, we're going to break for a take break.
Okay.